Okay, so very small group, so let's keep it intimate. Whenever there are any questions, I'm also happy to dive into them. And as you can see, I'm alone here without Neil, so unfortunately Neil had a little accident with an e-scooter, but he sends his best regards and couldn't make it this time. So instead, we're going to talk a bit about Planet A, and then I'm of course also not stealing the opportunity from you to learn a bit more about Makerside and going to explain a bit about what they do, of course not as well as Neil could do. So with Planet A, we started off because we believe that tomorrow's economy is based on today's investment decisions, and that capital burden has simply a great responsibility, and that we have to be aware of that. What the red line throughout what we do is that we are under the impression that we have built an unsustainable economy, an above one economy. So the graph on the right side shows that better than anything else, this is data coming from the Footprint Network, and basically shows that currently we are consuming 1.7 planets, of which, of course, we only have one. And our task as a human society is to get down to a below one economy so that we consume less than what we have. You've seen this many times before. And what I want to stress a bit more is that our planetary boundaries are a bit more complex than just climate change. So our planetary boundaries, there are 9 in sum, they cross across climate change, but also acidification of oceans, land use, and so on. And we already overstepped heavily in 4 regards. And 2 I want to point out. One is the extinction per million species year, where we are in the red, as you can see, as well as with geochemical flows, where we have massive nitrous and phosphorus pollution. And I believe that we will see a fundamental transition of every single industry. Green tech is not a future industry. Green tech is the future of all industries. And we are going to update everything we do anyways. So we have that unique opportunity in time to do it the right way and not to focus exclusively on CO2, which is very important, and on methane, but to also take into account everything else. How much water do we use? How many resources do we use? How do we care about land? And so with Planet A, we're trying to do exactly that. And luckily, there's already a lot happening. So for example, we see a lot of regulatory changes coming in our way. So we have the carbon prices under different regulatory schemes, such as the European Union Emission Trading Scheme. We have the same thing in California. We have plastic taxes. We have mandatory quotas for e-kerosene in the aviation sector. We have companies which are giving very ambitious pledges, having no idea how they can succeed at reaching them. We have massive divestment going away from fossil to renewable energy. And of course, we also have us as end customers starting to change our behavior. That being said, what we are seeing, what we are witnessing, what we are having the honor of witnessing at the moment as Planet A and also other investors in our space is the next generation of overly ambitious founders, which are understanding that their companies are their tools to battle climate change and global pollution, and that the years they are right now spending on this topic are likely the most crucial years we have, because now there is consensus amongst people that the next decade is going to matter than any decade before when combating climate change and global pollution. And these founders, they aim for having the dual impact. So how does it impact our planet, and how profitable can a business grow? And given the size and the dimensions of the challenge, there is already a lot of capital flowing into it, but is it enough? My answer to that would be absolutely no. And this is also why I started Planet A around 2 years ago, when I started to talk to entrepreneurs across Europe, finding out that they were severely lacking funding, especially when it's about this nitty-gritty tech solutions, which have the dirty word hardware in it. And so this is part of why we started Planet A. So luckily, there is traction. I'm sure you've heard about these funding rounds, and they are exchangeable, and there will be many more over the next decade, likely over the next years. And we as Planet A, we fundamentally believe that the heroes of this story are not we, it's not our investors, it's likely not going to be the government. The heroes of this story are the founders who are founding their companies as tools to combat climate change. And we like to support them as best as we can. And today I really want to focus on one aspect in particular, which is impact forecasting. Where do we come from? We come from an economy where our decisions for the past 2,500 years have primarily been focused and based on business decisions, so on financial data that is vastly available, highly transparent in some sectors, but at least it's very quantifiable. And we lack the same precision when it comes to impact data. And investors and startups alike, they really struggle to understand and assess this impact and how to make it visible. And this, of course, is leading to a buzzword that you've all heard, I think, only over the course of the conference many, many times, greenwashing. And we believe that with a tightening framework, tightening regulatory framework, and the changing customer behavior, companies which actually have a positive impact, because we will get to a point where there is transparency, companies that actually have a great positive impact, that there will be a correlation to how financially viable they will be. And this is what we base our investment thesis on, and this is why we are also very diligent when it comes to assessing impact. Before I dive into how we do that exactly, there is some overall definition that I didn't want to take away from you. So basically, we think about impact in 4 dimensions. The first one is obvious. It's climate mitigation, so greenhouse gas reduction. But the others aren't to be found on all the pitch decks. So we also focus on waste reduction, resource savings, and biodiversity protection. And as soon as we're able to see that there is a very positive trend in one of these categories, and it's not severely worse in one of the other aspects, then we have a green light to invest from the impact point of view. And impact, of course, is the product of 2 variables, one being the commercial aspect multiplied by how much better is it than with what we have today. The big question is, how do we find out how much better it is than with what we have today? And we did not have to reinvent the wheel here. We use something which is basically the gold standard of impact assessment. We use life cycle assessments. So life cycle assessments are basically a very holistic overview of all materialistic and energetic inputs which are needed to create a certain product. And this goes from the sourcing of the raw material over the transportation process, how it's being modified and processed, how it's used. So does my product, for example, give away microplastic in its lifetime, and how can it be recycled? And this is a very lengthy process. So for one of our latest investments, we've invested 240 man-hours into creating the life cycle assessment, which is a 60-page document, which is basically a scientific study, but it allows us to have precision in our choices. And we think that this precision is absolutely needed. And we do that by our internal team of scientists. So that's not something we outsource, but that's something we have in-house, and we really like to keep it that way. To give you an example, this is Inertec. Inertec is an e-kerosene company, so they do the nitty-gritty tech stuff. So they have a 2-stage reactor mechanism between a reverse water gas shift and then a Fischer-Tropsch mechanism to take CO2 and hydrogen, transform it into a synth gas, and then let it flow through a cat and produce sustainable circular fuel out of it. It is, of course, still an expensive process, but as you all know, there is network effects, and also the regulatory framework is going to favor these solutions over others. And if you are really interested in finding out how deep we go, there is this QR code on the right side, and I encourage you to look at it. It's basically a very dense down life cycle assessment that we did on Inertec, which can also be found on our website, where you can find Inertec. And basically it shows you how we think about impact. So we have the 90 grams of CO2 emissions for fossil fuels, which are currently emitted, compared to the 33 grams that Inertec provides, and that's the difference, and that's what you then multiply by the amounts of liters sold in a given year. Some other thoughts on our fund, and most of this is very straightforward. So this is basically the best market conditions that one can ever dream of for starting a company, because the best talent in class is looking for purpose whenever they are looking for new jobs. This is a given, and I think this is something you experience on a daily basis. Corporates must become sustainable. So in my job at Planet A, I not only talk to startups, but I also have a sales side, so I also do fundraise. I'm talking to a lot of corporates, and it's very insightful to see how aware most corporates, at least the very innovative ones, are when thinking about how can they become more sustainable. And they understand that, yes, a certain regulatory scheme is only going to force them to do so much, but they understand that if they do more, they are very likely going to gain a competitive advantage, and that's something we are also trying to help. We find that Europe is absolutely leading in science. So the spin-offs that we see from universities, the nitty-gritty tech stuff that I was talking about before, for example, Inertec is coming from Karlsruhe, and this is what we see, that there is absolutely overwhelming talent going into that space. we see that there is a lot of money now flowing into that space, and last but not least, the regulatory changes that we already talked about. And I don't want to stress this too much, but this is basically how we invest, and that's the three-circled Venn diagram that you could also see a couple of slides prior. So we basically invest at the intersection of teams, the sustainability aspect, and the business model. And the business model must be made in the sense that per unit of revenue generated, there is a unit of impact which comes out of it, so that there is no doubt about it. So we wouldn't, for example, invest into a company which uses 20% of their proceeds into offsetting, because that would be it's very likely that a later stage investor, for example, comes in and says, okay, let's get rid of this. We need that money in our bags. About Makerside. So, as I said, Neil couldn't make it today, but I think Makerside is, for a couple of reasons, an absolutely absurdly interesting company. So Neil used to be with Sphera, and Sphera is one of the carbon accounting companies of the old generation. So what we are currently seeing, the next wave of carbon accounting, this is very new, but there has already been a wave of carbon accounting companies in like 2005 to 2008. A lot of them are very successful. They have vast parts of the S&P 500 mandated under them. And Neil used to be the lead developer for Sphera's main tool, Gabi. At some point, Neil left Sphera because he wanted to start his own company, which is Makerside. And what Makerside basically does, it is an LCA creation engine. So what we do with a lot of manual force, they do automatically. So how it works is I, for example, upload the bill of material of my product into the system, and the system then tells me within seconds to minutes where I've sourced which component down to the raw material based on nothing but the DIN of the part and where I assemble. And they do that with a confidence rate of above 90%. And so they are able to provide real-time transparency into the supply chain, scope 1, 2, and 3. And they don't do carbon accounting per se, so they would not tackle that market, but they really try to enable engineers and purchasers to make more intelligent decisions, because suddenly you are enabled as an engineer to in real time understand the implications of different sourcing mechanisms. So how does my overall emission footprint, greenhouse gases, water, waste, and so on, how does it change if I start sourcing a certain screw not from Croatia but from Italy? And that is mind-blowing, and they not only do that for sustainability but also for costing and for compliance. And Neil could tell you much more about how they do it and why they do it. For me, there's only to say that I'm super happy to have the pleasure of working with him, because for us there is this intense overlap in mission and value alignment. Because we like to say that we are LCA maximalists or impact maximalists, because we've already taken some very unpopular decisions, because an LCA in the end turned out to not be as positive as we initially thought, and then decided against the commercially right decision. But we believe that this is the layer of transparency and precision that we need, and Makerside is completely in line with that. I already briefly talked about Inertec. I'm not clicking anymore. I already briefly talked about Inertec, but I want to. Now we're done. So I'm going to make a point about Traceless, which is one of our other portfolio companies, and this is more so coming from the nitty-gritty tech space. And Traceless Materials is basically a dual female founding team coming from Hamburg, and they developed Traceless Materials, as the name indicates. And Traceless is basically a biodegradable material. So they take an industry byproduct which is currently thrown onto fields as a not so well working fertilizer. So it's not competing with space we need to grow food at all. And then they are able to produce a plastic-like material out of it, which can be used for foiling, packaging, and so on. And the moment you throw it into nature, it comes into contact with microorganisms or water. It starts to resolve itself automatically. There is a lot to talk about, but in a nutshell, the economy we create shapes the only planet we have. So let's use everything we have and go into the right direction. Thanks a lot.